Hello friends, thank you for watching this video. I am Mohamad and today we're going to be discussing and implementing API versioning in ASP.NET Core 5. So what are we going to be covering today? First we're going to be discussing what is the problem, and then we're going to be discussing what is versioning, how can we implement it, the different types of versioning that we have, the ingredients that we're going to be needing, and then we're going to actually start coding. As always, you will find the source code in the description down below. Please like, share and subscribe if you like this video. It will really help the channel. So let's get started. So what is the problem that we're facing? So basically, how are we going to be dealing with changes over time? That's going to be the main thing that we're going to be tackling. So once we build our application and we deploy it and the users and the system start to integrate with it, it's impossible for us to change any implementation from that API, because any change that we do is basically we're going to be breaking those user and system integration, and we don't really want to do that. Second is, with time, requirements will change. So we might need to add new functionalities, we might need to add some bug fixes, we might need to remove some implementation, and any of those requirements that we're going to be adding might break the current version of our API, and we don't really want to do that. We need to figure out a way where we are going to be able to add those new functionality and new requirement without actually breaking the existing one. And at the end of the day, updating our API is a very complex problem, because basically we need to maintain the current implementation as well as adding new functionality. And there's going to be different ways for us to implement this. Some people will have two different APIs on two different servers, and this is going to be causing headache, because the more versions that you're going to be having, the more servers that you need, and it's going to be more harder to manage. But for this reason, we have something called API versioning. So basically, API versioning is evolving the API without breaking the clients who are currently using it. So it means that we can add more functionality, we can add all of those new requirements that we want to add, we can fix all of the fixes that we want to do, and implement it and push it to production without actually breaking any of the current implementation that our customer might be using. API versioning is not product versioning. Basically, API versioning focuses on more of the functionality and the work behind, rather than the actual product versioning. API versioning is complex since we need to support old and new version. We need to make sure that the changes that we make does not really break the existing functionality. We could have a new client that we want to use the latest and greatest functionality, while we have other clients who wants to use the basic functionality that we support, and we need to be able to maintain these two running simultaneously. So this is why API versioning is really important. When it comes to API versioning, there is no one size fits all. There's no one right implementation. You need to think about what is the use case that you have, what is the best approach that suits the API that you currently have. I cannot tell you, oh, use this on top of that. You need to see what type of user case scenario that you have, what type of API that you have, how the users are using it, and based on that you need to make that decision. Okay, based on that I need to use these types of implementation, as well as because there's a lot of ways we can implement API versioning, and there's no right answer for all. Every case is different, and based on your user scenario you need to decide. As always, we need to think about our clients and how they are using our API. Basically, we need to achieve client satisfaction as much as we can, because the easier for them to upgrade from one version of the API to another, the more successful our API is going to be. And we're going to make it as easier as possible for them, even though it might be a bit harder for us to implement it. So what are the different types of API versioning that we have? We're going to be discussing 4 types of API versioning: query string, URI versioning, metadata, and media types, and headers. So what is query string versioning? As we can see from the first picture here, at the end of the URL we have a query string with API-version = 1. So basically we are specifying a version of our API into the query string, and we're telling it which version of API we're going to be using. The other one is we are actually specifying the number inside the URL. So API /2.0, for example, which means that we are referring to the second version of our API. And this is also a URL based versioning. So the first one is a query string, where we are appending a query string, and the other one is we're actually adding the version number to our main URL. The third and the fourth version of API versioning are based on header versioning and media type versioning. So basically, the first one is we're gonna be able to send a custom header with the version number of the API which we wanna use, and the second one basically is we add some information to the accept type where we specify the version number that the API we want. Basically, we specify the version number of the API we want through appending the accept header. So what's the ingredients that we're going to be needing in order for us to build our application? Basically, we're going to be needing three things. We're going to be needing our IDE, which is going to be the Visual Studio Code. Second, we're going to be needing the .NET 5 SDK, as well as Postman in order for us to test our API. You can find the links, you can download all of these through the links on the screen, or you can find them in the description down below. Now, let's start coding. After we have downloaded all of our ingredients, now it's time for us to start developing. The first thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be checking that the .NET SDK has been installed successfully on our machine. In order for us to do that, we're going to be utilizing the .NET -- version keyword. So .NET -- version, and as we can see here, we have version 5.0.202, which is the latest version by the time of this recording. If you see any other number, that should be fine. If you see any error, what you need to do is you need to re-download the .NET SDK and reinstall it again. Next, basically right now, we're going to be creating our new application. So in order for us to do that, we're going to be utilizing the .NET new keyword. So .NET new web API -n, and we're gonna call it sample API. Great. So this should take a few seconds to complete. Perfect. Now this is created. Let's open it up in Visual Studio Code. Perfect. So once we have done that, let's open the terminal and let us just build our application to make sure that everything is building as it should be. So .NET build, and as we can see, build succeeded. Perfect. So the next step is we're gonna be cleaning up this project. So we're gonna be deleting two things. First, we're gonna be deleting the weather forecast.cs, and then we're gonna be deleting the controllers. Great. So once we have done that, the next step for us is we need to create a new file inside our directory, root directory, and this folder is going to be called models. Great. Once we have created this folder, we need to create a class inside this folder, and we're going to call it user, and this user class is going to be representing the model that we're going to be using inside our API. So this model is going to have two properties. The first one is going to be the ID, so prop int of type ID, and the other property is going to be name of type string, so prop string of type name. Perfect. Now that we have created our model, the next step for us is going to be creating our new controller. So in the controller folder, we create a new class, and we're going to call this class users controller. Great. Now that we have our class ready, let us start by adding some attributes to this class. First, we're going to be adding the API controller attribute, and then we're going to be defining the route for this controller. So route API / users. Great. And the next step, basically, we're going to be inheriting the controller base. Perfect. And right now we're going to be only implementing one action, and this action is going to be returning for us a list of users. So HTTP GET, and it's going to be, let's put the parentheses, and we're going to make it public. It's going to return an iAction result, and we're going to call it all users. And right now we're going to be mimicking going to the database and getting the information, so mimicking DB operation. And right now basically we're going to create a static list of users, and we're going to be returning it. So list of user, I'm gonna call it users equal new list of user. Let us fix these references. Great. Now we're gonna be creating 3 users. So new user, and we'll give it the ID equal to 1, and name is gonna be Mohamad, and then another new user, and the ID equal to, and the name we're gonna be giving it as Donald Duck, and the last one is new user, and it's gonna have an ID of 3 and name equal Neil. Great. So we have now 3 users, and what we're gonna be doing right now is we're gonna be returning these users back to the user. So how are we gonna doing that? So we're gonna put return, okay, and we're gonna send the list of users back. Perfect. So the next step after we have done this is let us test it. So first let us build our API. So .NET build, great. Now let us run it. .NET run, now it's running. Great. Now let us open Postman, and as you can see I have already populated it before. So let us just do a call to this port, to this URL, and we can see that we have the response coming back with the 3 users, Mohamad, Donald, and Neil. Perfect. So now we are 100% sure that our application is running. Let us now go back to our IDE and let's stop our application. Now that we have made sure that our API is running as it should be, now we need to start thinking about adding versioning to it. So how do we do that? We're gonna be utilizing a package that Microsoft provide, and we're gonna be adding it to our application. So to do that, we're gonna be utilizing the .NET add package. So .NET add package, it's gonna be Microsoft .aspnetcore.mvc versioning, and this should take a few seconds. Great. Once we have it installed, let's check our sample API.cs proj, and we can see that it has been added successfully here. Great. So once we have done that, the next step for us to add API versioning is we need to update our startup class. So let's go to our startup class, and inside our configure services method, let's add it here. So it's going to be services.add API versioning. So what we are doing here, we are just updating, let's add a command. It's going to be updating the middleware to use actually versioning. Great. So right now here, once we have added the service.add API versioning, we're basically telling ASP.NET Core that it needs to implement versioning. Perfect. So let's see what happened right now if we run our application. So let's save this and let us run it. Apologize. Let us run it. Great. Now let's go to Postman again and let us run the same request again. And we see we have a new error, and it says this error that API version is required, but it's not specified. And this makes sense. Why? Because currently we have added the line that's basically injecting versioning into our functionality, into our application, but we still did not configure it. We still did not tell .NET Core how to handle the API versioning. So one way of doing it is in order for us to fix this without doing any changes to our code is to append the API version to our URL. So here, if we add a query string, we call it API dash version, and we give it, for example, a version of 1.0, and we do the send, we can see that the application is running. Why is that? Because once we have added the version 1.0, now the ASP.NET Core applications know which version of the API is gonna be returning back. But you might think to yourself, but we didn't specify any version of 1.0 in our application. That's correct, because once the application has started, it had the scan on the controllers, and it saw that there's only one version of the controllers, and those version of the controllers are basically all wrapped up in a version of 1.0 labels, the basic level or the first level of versions that we have. So for this reason, when we put API version 1.0, it will automatically work. So, but if we're gonna go with this is still gonna be breaking all of our current implementation or users implementation and application implementation, because they need to update all of their URLs in order for them to add this API-version into it. So how can we fix that, and how can we avoid that? So the first thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be going back to Visual Studio Code, and basically we need to expand the configuration for add API versioning. So we're going to add options, and the first options that we're going to be adding is this line: assume default versioning when unspecified, which means that in case that we did not specify the API-version in our URL, the application automatically will add that version automatically to that URL, and it's gonna process it. So let's see if that will work. Let us stop our application and run it again. Now the application is running. Let's go back to Postman and let's send the request. And now we can see it's working with the API versioning. Now let's remove this. And let's send this. And we can see right now it's not working. Oh, sorry, I did not save it before running it. I apologize. So let's run it again. And now it should work. Great. So right now we did not specify any API version inside the URL, but we have got the results back, because right now .NET is currently adding its default version even though we have not specified it in the URL. If we add it to the URL, it will still work. So let's try it. Query string API-version equal 1.0, and we send this request, and we can see the information are coming back as it should be. Great. So let us stop the application and let's see what other configuration we can add here. So the other configuration that we want to add is the API version. So options.default API version. So this is the default version that we are supporting. So right now, because we don't have any at the implementation, we're going to be utilizing the API version.default. So basically, if we hover on top of default, we can see that it's always going to be the 1.0, because it's a default version that we have. If we want to specify our own version, it's going to be something like this: new API version, for example 1.1, and basically this here we are specifying our own API version. So let's see how this is going to work. So let's run this application, .NET run, and let's go back to Postman and let's do this request again. And right now, because we have added 1.1, if we change this to 1.1, it will work, because we have updated the API version from 1.0 here to 1.1. And if we look at the response header, we can see that nothing is really being sent back, because we have automatically specified it here. But if we remove this and we use the API default version, now let's stop the application and run it again. And now let's remove this 1.0 to 1.1. Actually, let's remove all of this. We don't really need it. And let's send the request. And we can see that we are receiving back the information. So basically here, we have specified that the default version of the application is going to be 1.0, but once we have, for example, released version 2.0 or 1.1 or 3.0, we can actually specify the default version here. So if there's any request coming in without the right version in the query string or in the header or in the URL, it will automatically pick up this version. Great. So once we have done that, the third one we're gonna add is we're gonna send back all of the available API versions. So options report API versions equal true. So basically this is gonna be returning, let's add a comment. This is going to return all available API versions. So let's see how this is gonna work. Let's stop the application and run it again. Now let's go back to Postman and let's send the request, and we can see the information coming back. But now if we go to the headers, we can see that the API supported version is 1.0. So this way, if our clients are trying to integrate and they want to know which is the current implementation, what they can do is they can do just one call and they can actually get back the supported version directly back in the headers. Great. So now that we have implemented that, it's time to add some new APIs. So we're gonna consider whatever we have right now as version 1, and we're gonna be basically adding version 2, and we can see how we can implement different versioning in order to switch between version 1 and version 2. So the first thing we're gonna be doing is we're gonna be stopping the application, and we're gonna be doing some changes to the user class here. We're gonna call it user version 1. Let's make this bigger, and then let's update the old controller. So it will be v1 and the changes we're going to be making right now is instead of having the users with an ID of int, we're going to be returning the users with ID of GUID. This is a very dumb implementation, but this is a good way for us to see what's the difference, how we can handle these two differences that's going to be coming in. And how are we going to be able to switch between two versions of the API? One of them is going to be an int, the other one is going to be a GUID. Perfect. So once we have done that, the next step for us is, let's rename this as well. We're going to call it user v1. Now let's create a new model. And this model is going to be basically user v2. And this is going to represent, for example, the new breaking change that we're going to have. And this class is going to be the same. So the first property, instead of an int, is going to be a GUID, but it's going to be the ID. Great. And the next one is going to be as well a string, and it's going to be the name. Great. So now that we have version 1 and version 2, the next step is we want to actually do the separation here. So what we can do is, and a lot of people do that, is they can create a new controller and they can control it, for example, something like that. It's going to be users v2, for example, controller. And then they're going to be building this controller here and adding all of the information. Well, I don't like this approach. It's going to make it a lot cluttery and really hard to manage all of these controllers, specifically with really big applications. So the way I prefer to do it is to separate version 1 and version 2 by actually having subfolders inside the controllers. So let's create a new folder and we'll call it v1, and we'll create a new folder and we'll call this folder v2. And then what we can do is we can move this to folder v1, and let's update its namespace location to .v1. Great. And the first thing we're going to be doing here is we're going to be specifying that this controller is belong to the version 1 of our application. So how do we do that? It's going to be very simple. Basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to adding a new attribute, and this attribute is very easy. It's going to be API version, straight to the point, and we're going to specifying which version of our application this is referring to. So we're going to saying that this current implementation is going to be of version 1.0. Great. Now let us create a new controller, And this new controller, we're gonna be adding all of the new implementation for user v2. So inside the v2 folder, we're gonna create a new class, and this class is also gonna be called users controllers. And we're gonna do the same thing. It's gonna be API controller. Let's fix the references. Next one is gonna be the root. It's also gonna be API / users. And then here we're gonna be specifying the version, and this here is gonna be API version, and we're gonna be specifying version 2.0. Great. So once we have done that, now let's inherit from the controller base, and we're gonna implement the same method. So let's copy it. And we're gonna be basically just changing this one from version 1 to version 2. So instead of me typing it, this is saving time. And now let's fix those references. Okay, great. But now we have an error, because right now ID is not an int, ID is a GUID. So perfect, that's what we wanted to see. So now right now let's implement it. So GUID and using system dot new GUID, and basically this here is gonna be creating a GUID every time. Great. So now we have those ready. Now let's discuss how are we gonna be doing the versioning. Let us start doing the versioning first by utilizing the query string, as we have already discussed before. So let us run this application and see what do we have. Now let's go back to Postman, and let's see what's gonna happen if we run our application directly. So let's click on send, and as you have saw here, we haven't really changed anything. We just did the same request as before, and because we didn't specify any version of our API, it automatically took the version 1.0, and we have returned the list of users which still have an ID as an integer. Great. Now what happens if we change the version to API version equal to 2.0, and let's send it. And now as you can see, when we have specified the version 2.0, it has automatically routed to the new controller, and it has returned an ID where the ID is a GUID, which is what you want to see. Perfect. So now that we have tested this, let's do a quick summary. We can see right now that we have two controllers, one in version 1 and one in version 2. And we have added basically two different implementations. Both of them are returning the list of users, but the list of users, one of them has a list of ID, which is version 1 as an integer, and the second one in version 2, the ID is going to be a GUID instead of an int. Perfect. So right now, this within this implementation, we have implemented the versioning based on query string, which is fine. The next step, we're going to be adding something like this. So instead of having it as a query string, we want to do it something like 2.0, and we can have the actual version inside the URI instead of having it as a query string. So how do we do that? Also, it's very easy. Let's go back to Visual Studio Code. Let's stop the application. And the first thing we're going to be doing is we're just going to be adjusting the route. So inside the route here, after the word API /, and we're gonna be adding this. So we're gonna put V, which stands for the version that we want, and we're gonna be adding version 2. And it's gonna be API version. And let's try this out. So let us run the application again. And now let's go back to Postman. Let's remove this and see what happens with the normal scenario. Perfect. We can see that the response back returned the version 1 of our application, which is the ID. And right now, if we put /v 2.0 and we send it, we can see that we are actually getting the ID as good. Perfect. So, and let's see if we remove the .0, what happens. We're also getting the same result, which is the ID of type good. Great. So now that we have updated the route and we have checked that it's working through the URL versioning, the next step for us is we're gonna be appending the version that we want into the accept header, and we're gonna see how this works. So the first thing we're gonna be doing is I'm gonna be commenting this out because I'm gonna be posting this to GitHub so you guys can have access to the source code. And let's remove all of this. And now we have our normal implementation without the URL. So how do we implement media type versioning? Let's go back to our startup class. And inside our startup class, what we need to do here is, let's add a comment, add media type versioning. Great. So how do we add it? Also very easy. It's gonna be adding the options, and we're gonna put the API version reader. Basically, the API version reader is we are specifying what type of versioning that we want to implement, and we're gonna make it equal to new media type API version reader. And let's fix the references. Perfect. And now we need to specify what is the key that we want to add. So for now, we're just going to specify it as x-api-version. Great. So now let's jump back to Postman. And let's see how we can implement this. So let's remove the versioning from the URL first. Great. Now let's send it to see what's happening. Perfect. Now we can see that we are actually getting the response back perfectly. Now what happened if we want to get version 2? So inside the headers tab, we want to add the accept keyword. So basically the accept header, and we're going to be specifying that we're going to be getting back the application.json response because it's the default one. And with that, we're going to be requesting the version of our API, which is going to be the x-api-version equal 2.0. Send. It's getting, I think it's colon 2.0. So it needs to be x-api-version equal 2.0. And now we click on send, and we can see that we have got the response back. And now if I remove this, we got the response as good, which is version 2. And if I remove this right now and send it, we can see that we're getting back the response at version 1. And if I add it back in and I send it again, we are getting it as good. Perfect. So now that we have added this, now let's discuss if we want to, for example, add our custom header. So instead of having it with the accept, we want to add something like this, x.api-version, for example. And we want to put here 2.0. So how do we accomplish that? It's also very easy. Let's go back to our Visual Studio Code. Let's stop the application. And here, let us add a new one, which is going to be new header API version reader, and we're going to be specifying the keyword that we want, which is going to be x-api-version. And basically the x-api version here that we can see, this is going to be the header keyword. So what we did here is we added a new header version reader, API version reader, with the keyword, which basically right now aspnetcore is going to be listening to it in order to figure out which version of our application is going to be using. So let's save this. Let us run the application again. And let's go back to Postman. And let us send this request. So first of all, let us disable these two. and see what happens. Perfect, we got version 1. This was accepted, the expected one. Now let's check this one. Because we have removed this code, it should return also a version 1 of our application. Great. Now let's add this, which is API x-API-version. We specify 2.0, and now we should receive GUID. Perfect. So right now we have specified two ways of attaching the API versions to the header. What happens if we want to attach both of them at the same time? So let's say we want to make it available to add it to the accept header as well as to our custom API version. So how do we do that? Also, it's very simple. So what we need to do is we need to add something called API version reader, which is basically the class, and we're going to be utilizing that from the class something called combine. Combine is we're going to be combining different ways in order for us to accept the header of our the versions of our API. So once we have added this combine thing, all we need to do is just add the two types of API versioning that we want. So we want to accept this one, so we'll add it like this. So right now this will allow us to have the header one, and all we need to do is add a comma and add the second one which we added before. Let's delete this. And right now our API will support both of them. Basically, it's gonna first support the API header. If it doesn't find it there, it's gonna look into the media type and try to find it there. So this way we are supporting two versions of our API. Two ways to support versioning into our API. So let's stop the application and run it again. Great, now let's go back to Postman and let's test it out. So let's uncheck this and send it. We should receive with an int. Perfect. Let's check this. We should receive the GUID. Great. Let's check this. We should also receive with a GUID. Great. And now let's remove this, and now we should receive it. Perfect. And now if we click on both at the same time, we should also receive GUID. Perfect. So now we have done this. Right now we have covered the 4 different ways that we can implement versioning into our API. So let's do a quick recap. The first one using the query string, which was like this, where we have actually added a new query string and we called it API-version equal 1.0, for example, and then from there we were able, or 2.0, and we were able to specify which version of the API. And then we have used the API URL versioning, where it was something more like this, version 2.0, and we are actually specified it within the URL. And the third one was actually attaching it to the header. You can go with either one of these choices. All of them are supported. You need to see what is your business case and what is the best way that you can upgrade your API and without breaking any current functionality. And based on these decisions, you can choose one of these 4 in order for you to create versioning within your API. Great. Now that we have 2 versions, let us just see one thing. So if we go to the headers right now, and if you remember the supported versions from before, we can see right now that they have 2 supported versions, which is 1.0 and 2.0, and this is all because of this report API versions. And now because we have added that, now we can see that we have 2, and we have, for example, if we have a v3, we see the 3.0 and so forth. Great. So now let's stop this application. And right now we're going to be discussing one last point, is deprecation of controllers. So what we have done right now is we have created version 2 of our application. And basically what we want to do is we want a way to tell all of our new clients that we want to integrate with our API. Once they see that they have version 1 and version 2, that they want to only use version 2 and not use version 1. And how do we do that? Basically, what we can do is we can add a deprecated value to our controllers. It means when they are doing this call, it's going to show them within that header that this request is deprecated. So deprecated means that it's going to be removed soon and we're not going to be used anymore. But this way as well, our current clients will know that they need to update their application to the latest version. So it's a win-win situation. So how do we add the deprecated value? So let's go back to version 1, and within here, the API version, all we need to do is add a comma and type deprecated, if I can type, and we're gonna make it equal true. And let's save this. And right now let's just build this application. Perfect, and now let's run it. Great, and now let's go back to Postman and let's do this call. And first of all, let's set a body. Oh, we still have specified version 2, which is fine. Let's remove these and let's see. We're getting back the end, which is version 1. But now let's take a look at the response headers. What do we see? We see something really interesting. Now we have seen that the supported header version is 2.0, which is what we want. And we can see that the version 1 that we are currently using has been deprecated, which is great. So that way everyone will know from our clients or the system that they are using that there's a deprecated version. So right now, if I choose, for example, version 2, I still got this information just so it will also be known to anyone who's implementing it that there's 2 different versions and you shouldn't use version 1, you should only use version 2 because the version 1 is being deprecated. Perfect. So this is gonna be our video for today. Let us do a quick summary. What we have done is we have discussed different versions, different types, the problems without the problem with API upgrading, and then we're going to discuss the solution, which is API versioning, and then we discuss a different way we can implement API versioning, which is R4, which is going to be the query string, the URL, the media type, which is the accept header and the custom header. And then from that point forward, we have discussed how we can add deprecation to our existing controllers. Thanks a lot for watching. Please write your question in the description down below. And if you have reached this part of the video, please type your favorite type of chocolate in the comments down below and I will like it. And so I will know that you have watched the complete video. Thank you very much. Please share this video if you find it useful and have a great day.